Nicole left the noisy world of Fairmont Crest and stepped into the hospital with an idea that felt almost brutally simple: close the final chapter of an old misunderstanding, reclaim peace for herself, and if possible, for the wounds that had stretched on too long. But the moment she stood beside Peach's bed, she understood this was not a courtesy visit, and not a belated reconciliation. It was a trial staged by fate, with no lawyers and no jury, only two women and a secret buried alive for so long it had turned into a toxin seeping through every corner of their lives. Peaches no longer seemed fully anchored to the present, her body fragile like paper soaked in tears and time, yet her eyes were disturbingly vivid, the eyes of someone who had carried a private flame for years and had chosen this final moment to ignite it and burn away every mask. The absence of witnesses made the room a perfect trap. There was no one to confirm, no one to challenge, no one to pull Nicole out of the direct collision with something she had never prepared for. When Peaches, with what little strength remained, handed over the last missing piece, the truth that Eva was Nicole's biological daughter landed like a heavy stone slammed into the floor of her memory. The map of Nicole's life rearranged itself at once. The sacrifices she had made, the decisions she once believed were cold but were really survival, the anger she had carried toward Eva, the moments she had punished herself for failing to understand a young woman who always seemed both proud and deeply unsettled, all of it transformed into new echoes threaded with blood and breath, a ruthless biological line stretched taut between two generations. Nicole did not break down in the way people expect from a revelation that promises reunion. The first wave was rage, fierce and icy, like a blade pulled out of darkness and forced into her hand. That fury was not only for Peaches, who had chosen a moment too late to confess, but also for the power system surrounding Fairmont Crest, where secrets were traded like currency. She felt violated in the deepest meaning of motherhood, as if her right to be a mother had been stolen, negotiated, replaced by a fabricated story, then wrapped in the silk of status and silence. She had lived believing she was the one who chose, that her losses had been placed into orderly compartments so they could no longer bleed. But this truth shattered that illusion in an instant. If Eva was her daughter, what did all those years of seeing Eva as a dangerous variable in Fairmont Crest's ecosystem truly mean? Had she looked into the eyes of her own flesh and blood with suspicion? Had she allowed social prejudice, rumors, and family schemes to blur the instinct to protect? Under the steady hum of the heart monitor, Nicole sensed the particular cruelty of delay. This was not a secret revealed to save what was still salvageable. It was a secret released like an explosive after the last chance to defuse it had vanished. Peaches was slipping out of the world, taking with her the most vital explanations. Nicole's anger shifted into another state entirely, the rage of someone abandoned with questions that had no living mouth left to answer. Who stole her motherhood? Who arranged for Eva to be taken away, raised inside another orbit, erased from Nicole's truth? Was this a random tragedy of fate or a deliberate design? Had money exchanged hands, records been altered, medical staff bribed? Or was it even darker than that, a family or power block that saw a child not as a life to protect but as a future weapon, a card to be played at the moment most useful against Nicole? Then fear arrived, quietly and tightly, closing around her throat. Because anyone capable of stealing Nicole's child and burying the truth for so many years was not just powerful, but patient in a way that was chilling. In Fairmont Crest, real power was never the loudest voice. Real power was the ability to rewrite history and make the new version feel morally flawless. Nicole understood that. She had watched wars inside families where truth was chopped into fragments, rearranged, displayed like polished virtue. She had also survived by knowing what to keep behind locked doors. But this time the secret was her daughter, and it turned Nicole into prey suddenly awake. When Nicole finally left the hospital room, the building's doors did not feel like an exit. They felt like the gates of a battlefield. Fairmont Crest was no longer a place she could navigate using old rules. Every relationship looked different under this new lens, and suspicion began leaking into every crack. Faces she once trusted seemed to hold shadows behind them. Advice that had sounded caring could now be bait. Even the way people had spoken about Eva, the way they had positioned her inside the community's power stories, suddenly felt like a trail of dangerous clues. Who benefited from Nicole never knowing she had a daughter? Who kept her in that void to better control her emotions, her marriage, her political ambitions, her social alliances? And if Eva had been placed into a different trajectory to serve a long-term plan, what stage of that plan had already been reached? In the hours that followed, Nicole was torn between two brutal extremes. One part of her wanted to run straight to Eva, to hold this new truth as a form of redemption, as a long-lost instinct finally returning. Another part, colder and more wounded, knew that motherhood in Fairmont Crest was not just an emotion. It was an earthquake with political consequences. One wrong move could turn Eva into a target, could expose Nicole as vulnerable, could provoke the same forces that once stole the child to strike again and bury the truth anew. Nicole was no longer asking whether she loved Eva. She was asking whether she was strong enough to protect Eva against whoever had already proven they could bend fate. Her rage began to take shape as decisions edged with steel. She wanted records. Dates. Names. The full chain of attendance around the years when life had been quietly rewritten. Every detail became a bone she would not stop chewing until it cracked. She remembered Peaches as someone who had hovered near the margins of major stories, a woman both obscure and oddly dangerous, as if she carried knowledge that made others wary. Nicole wondered whether Peaches had been the only guardian of this truth or merely the last surviving link in a network that had since dissolved. And if Peaches had remained silent for so long, what had finally forced this confession? Was someone about to silence her? Or had she chosen to hand Nicole a bomb capable of igniting a war Peaches no longer had to live through? From this point on, the storm was never only about bloodline. It threatened to expose a whole architecture of betrayal holding Fairmont Crest together. Nicole began revisiting Peaches' old conflicts, the times she had been pushed away from the center of influence, the humiliation she had swallowed as the price of survival inside an elite world run by reputation. Had the truth about Eva been a blade kept for negotiation? Had there once been a bargain made in secret, trading silence for protection, money, or the simple right to remain alive and relevant? If so, who signed that bargain, and when did they break it? Inside the chaos, Nicole could not avoid the hardest confrontation of all, the part of herself she feared. She had always taken pride in emotional control, refusing to become anyone's victim. But this truth ripped that control apart, revealing a woman who had been robbed of a life she should have had. The shock made Nicole afraid of her own reactions. Her rage could push her into reckless action, could destroy an innocent person, could collapse alliances she might need to keep Eva safe. But if she stayed still, if she chose extended caution, might the people who once stole her child move faster than her again? Her mind fractured along the most dangerous line. She wanted to go public, and she was terrified of going public. A public revelation would be the sharpest strike against the architects of the lie. But it would also put Eva under the scalpel of public opinion, where her past would be dissected, where the fractures in the family would be displayed, where Nicole herself would be judged for not seeing what was hidden from her by deliberate design. Who would stand beside her? Who would weaponize this truth against her? Who would offer help only to demand a life-threatening debt later? In Fairmont Crest, compassion often came with a bill. Even those closest to Nicole could no longer be assumed innocent. There is a betrayal more poisonous than open hostility, betrayal by silence. If anyone in her inner circle had known or suspected the truth about Eva and said nothing, that person was complicit in the theft of motherhood. Nicole did not know whether she could ever forgive that. She also did not know whether she would ever deserve Eva's forgiveness. Because if Eva had grown up with a missing origin, that absence was not merely personal pain. It was the product of a privileged society willing to sculpt a child's fate for adult warfare. The deeper Nicole went, the more she was forced into a corner she despised, the corner where every path required sacrifice. If she rushed toward Eva, she might trigger a counterattack from the hidden enemy. If she moved quietly and investigated from the shadows, she might miss the critical moment to protect Eva from immediate danger. If she accused the wrong person, she could shatter the protections she still needed. But if she trusted the wrong person, she could hand her enemies the keys to everything. In that pressure, Nicole began to change into something Fairmont Crest had rarely seen from her. She became less patient with surface morality, less willing to be lulled by polished narratives, more ready to use the weapons this community respected most: selective truth, strategic alliances, and engineered fear. She had once sworn she would never become a version of powerful women who wielded secrets like daggers. But now the secret was her child, and the line between ethics and survival blurred. She could feel harshness growing inside her, and she hated it, yet she understood that softness would be the quickest way to lose Eva a second time. Peach's impending death did not close the story. It opened dangerous gaps. Her personal belongings, her last calls, her visitors before Nicole arrived, the timing of her final confession, all of it became evidence to be examined through the eyes of someone who might already be hunted. Had Peaches left anything physical behind, a letter, a copy of a birth record, a note naming whoever gave the order? Or had the truth lived only in her mind, and had she chosen to carry part of it into the grave so her final act of control could still shape the war? The storm was poised to swallow Fairmont Crest because the revelation was never simply emotional. It was political. When bloodline becomes power, people become soldiers. Some would try to reshape Eva into a symbol, a new face that could rearrange family alliances. Others would want the truth smothered before it destabilized long-standing arrangements of benefit and inheritance. Some would posture as Nicole's allies only to bind her in obligation and turn that obligation into a noose. And someone who genuinely loved Nicole could be dragged into the blast as a convenient sacrifice, because power wars rarely demand fairness. Most terrifying of all, Nicole could not predict Eva's response. Would Eva accept the truth? Or despise it for arriving too late? Would she believe Nicole had been a victim, or see her as part of the system that abandoned her? Truth does not guarantee reunion. It only guarantees the collapse of older lies. And in that collapse, Nicole had to choose what she would become. A mother seeking forgiveness, a warrior seeking protection, or a powerful woman prepared to destroy anyone who stood between her and the child she had lost. So who truly rewrote Nicole's past? Who had the reach to control a blood secret for so many years? Was it an old enemy of the family who hoped to use Eva as a future inheritance weapon? Was it someone intimate who feared Nicole would become unstoppable if a biological daughter stood at her side? Or was this merely one layer of a larger conspiracy tied to the glittering charitable galas, the polished public images, and the ruthless private bargains Fairmont Crest perfected? That night, when Nicole faced the mirror, she saw a woman burning in silence. Her anger was no longer just an emotion. It was fuel. Her inner conflict was no longer private pain. It was a front line. And if Fairmont Crest had assumed Nicole could be soothed by status, reputation, and social rules, they might be about to discover a harsher truth: a mother who has been robbed becomes the most dangerous threat to any manufactured order. The hospital door had closed, but the real war had only opened. And the final question, sharp as a blade and still unanswered, hung over everything. Had Peaches told the whole truth, or only cracked open half a door to shove Nicole into a maze where the winner had already been chosen? Thank you all for your loyal support and listening.